What happens when Earth's mightiest heroes lose their powers? This is the question asked by Season 2, Episode 15 of the TV show Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, in an episode called Powerless. Look, I know what you're thinking, but this title actually isn't clickbait. Not really, anyway, because even if you were watching this show as it aired like 8 or 9 years ago, there's a pretty solid chance you never saw this one. And I'll explain why, but first let's take a look at the episode and why I think it earns this title. So the episode is bookended by Amora the Enchantress and Loki hatching schemes in Loki's prison, where he ended up guarded by the Midgard Serpent after the events of the Season 1 finale. But this isn't important really. I mean, in terms of the show's ongoing serialized plot threads, it's important, and it does a lot of work setting up the Ragnarok story, which EMH was building up to for its never realized third season. But in terms of the episode itself and why it works, this stuff is largely incidental. But the key part, the inciting factor, is this. These villains both want the Avengers gone, for one reason or another. They're spying on the Avengers, specifically Captain America, Iron Man and Thor, as the heroes have a bit of a tussle with the Wrecking Crew, a bunch of absolute jamokes. It's all in a day's work. I mean, these rubes aren't exactly an Avengers level threat after all. At this point, with her newfound power granted by Surtur, the Enchantress casts a spell to strip the Avengers of their superpowers. So Thor becomes just a guy and Mjolnir disappears. Captain America reverts to his pre-serum body, which looks like a weird man-child. And Iron Man? Well, two things happen to Iron Man. First, his suit downgrades to the chunky and primitive Mark I, and second, he loses his intelligence.
Not sure how you did that, don't really care.
Cars, motorcycles, repulsor rays. Hot wiring's hot wiring.
That, to me, is probably the rawest deal here. The other two just get physical debuffs, but Tony just sustains immense brain damage, like railroad spike through head levels of IQ damage. But yeah, after this, there's not really that much to the plot. First, our heroes try to flee the Wrecking Crew, and then Loki sort of shows up, his soul piloting the destroyer. The powerless Avengers hold him off for a time, but when all hope is lost, they regain their powers and dispatch the threat. You see, there's a very convenient break clause in this spell. It turns out that to restore their outer strength, the heroes must find their inner strength. Specifically, if Thor develops a sense of humility, then the curse is broken.
So long as there is life, there is always hope!
This is all very convenient, and the plot itself is hardly going to win any awards, but that's not what makes this episode a great one. That is due to the character stuff going on here. To massively oversimplify, modern popular fiction, especially with regard to film or television, is split between two poles: character-driven stories and plot-driven stories. This dichotomy is not absolute. All stories are driven by some mixture of character and plot, but generally speaking, you can divide most things into one category or the other. Plot-driven stories are your detective novels, or I guess in Marvel terms, most of your Avengers movies. The thing that keeps you plugged in is the twists and turns of the story. On the other hand, the most important thing in character-driven stories is, well, character. The prime motivating factor for the story and the main source of enjoyment for the viewer or reader is the way characters interact, grow, and feel. A good way of conceptualizing this split in terms of Marvel is to think of the first two Guardians films. The first film is a race for the orb, the Power Stone. That's what drives the story. Getting the orb, keeping it, getting it back from Ronan. But in the second film, the main conflicts are around Peter's relationships with his two families, the Guardians and Ego, his father. It's his decision to abandon Ego for his chosen family which kicks off the film's climax, for instance. Bringing this back to Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Powerless, a lot of this show is very plot-driven. That's not to say there aren't great character moments in amongst the action, but I think we see another side of the coin with this episode. The plot is bare bones, and the reason this episode is a great Avengers story is because it literally strips these superheroes of their superhumanity, and all that's left to drive the episode is pure character. the way their minds work, no powers to fall back on, and in these moments we see their relationships with themselves and one another without the robot suits and the lightning and the lasers clouding our vision. And it's in this naked space that Thor learns humility, undergoes genuine growth. EMH never really had the whole Thor unworthy kind of character arc that we associate with him thanks to stories like the 2011 Thor film, and it's in this episode and this character-driven space that we see a growth of this sort take place. We see Thor finding value within himself beyond his godly status and the might of his hammer arm.
These men, they would make the ultimate sacrifice to stop you. Their power lies not in their abilities, but in their hearts.
It's been said that one of the main differences in the philosophy of character between Marvel and DC heroes is that while both companies write about superhumans, DC focuses on the super and Marvel on the humans. Like most sayings, it barely holds up to any degree of scrutiny whatsoever, but I think there is a grain of truth here. Whereas DC's most popular heroes like Batman and Superman often seem godly in their power, their intelligence, their strength of character, and so on, Marvel's most popular hero has always been Spider-Man, a hero whose powers are almost a curse. The responsibility he feels towards the mantle of Spider-Man stops him from having a happy life. Crucially though, Spider-Man and most other Marvel heroes aren't Nietzschean Übermensch, they're people first and superpowers second. And this episode of Earth's Mightiest Heroes really showcases this idea, again by literally stripping the super from the human. This is a switcheroo that's been done effectively a bunch of times. One of the highlights of What If Episode 1 for me was seeing a scrawny Steve Rogers with no serum, and that asks the same question as this episode. Who is Captain America without his powers? Did everything special about him come out of a bottle? The answer, as it turns out, is an emphatic no. But it's not just Steve. A human Thor is a concept as old as Marvel's take on the character itself. Thor started out as crippled Surgeon Donald Blake, who would become the mighty Thor when he struck his cane. And this episode is obviously riffing on this old concept, along with a bit of old 90s Eric Masterson vibes thrown in for good measure. You might notice that Hawkeye has shown up a few times in the visuals so far, but I've not mentioned him yet. That's because unlike the others, he isn't affected by the Enchantress's spell, either because he doesn't actually have any powers, or because Enchantress didn't consider him worth spending the effort on. It's probably this latter reason actually. After all, Tony doesn't have any powers, but she still dropped his IQ like Grandmaster drops a beat.
1, 2, 3, 4. I realize there's a wormhole in space and time.
But it's precisely because of this that the Hawkeye stuff works alongside our main three characters. In humanizing these more powerful heroes, we see just how tough Hawkeye actually is. And that's something that's hard to see when Hawkeye's playing catch up with a literal god. But some of my favourite character stuff in this episode altogether is the way Hawkeye takes the lead against the Wrecking Crew and manages to hold them off alone. By the end of this episode, there's an unspoken yet very clear sense of newfound respect in our characters for Hawkeye, since they've now walked a mile in his shoes and been left in the dust. So that's what makes this story a great Avengers story, because it is the highlight of this show's character-driven side, while maintaining the classic team dynamic, albeit with a fresh spin. But if this is all new to you, even if you watch this show, there's a reason. This episode didn't air. At least not in the US, not initially. I'm from the UK, and I'm pretty sure I remember seeing this on Disney XD all those years ago, just like normal. I remember liking it, but there was nothing out of the ordinary with it for me. It aired, maybe got rerun a few times, and that was that. I only learned recently that potentially thousands of viewers never saw this episode until way after the series finished, and I learned this in the comment section of my last EMH video, so shout out Matt Clark for inspiring this video. And this happened because of Disney. Disney acquired Marvel, and after the resounding success of the first Avengers film, the executives decided they wanted a show more similar to the look and feel of the movies, and one that integrated better into the other shows they were doing, like Ultimate Spider-Man. Hence, Avengers Assemble was born, and that meant Earth's Mightiest Heroes was sent to the chopping block. Weirdly, a result of this was that Powerless, originally intended to be the 15th episode of the second season, was dropped from the original airing. This is likely because, as mentioned earlier, it sets up the Surtur/Ragnarok storyline pretty heavily, and well, no season 3 means no Ragnarok, and somehow that meant no Powerless. Maybe they thought it would have been mean to show the fans something that would never come to pass. I think it's far meaner though to have kept so many people from seeing such a great story. This tale does have a somewhat happy ending. The episode was included as a bonus feature on the Season 2 DVDs, aired a while after that, and you can stream it right now on Disney+. But it does still bear a mark of this whole torrid affair. It's listed as the last episode of Season 2. I don't mind this too much though. If you're a first-time viewer binging the show on Disney+, this episode is really as good a place as any to say goodbye to this show and these characters. Or maybe not goodbye, maybe see you soon, because we both know you'll be rewatching it sooner or later. But speaking of seeing you soon, that's it for this video. More stuff coming soon, and let me know where Powerless sits in your ranking. I'd be interested to hear also how and when American fans of the show first actually discovered this episode. But yeah, please do like and sub if you're enjoying these videos on Earth's Mightiest Heroes that I'm making. It really does help out. See you around.